Right, this is the last of our series here, Psalm 134. So we all started at Psalm 120. And so what we're going to do today is look at this last psalm of these 15 psalms. It's a short psalm, only 3 verses. And so we'll look at it in some kind of detail. And then after that, we'll do a bit of a synopsis of these 15 psalms that we've been looking at, using the idea of waves coming into the shore and the idea of the tide coming in. And so I think as you see the illustration, you'll understand more and more why we're using that particular illustration. So Psalm 34 or 134 I have entitled "We Have Arrived." And so really these Psalms have been all about this journey that pilgrims have been taking as they're approaching Jerusalem to worship God. And so as we've talked about, the original setting of these Psalms was probably likely Hezekiah, as he was dealing with the enemies of Israel and the enemies that were trying to hinder them from serving God. But they were able to pray and break through and see that even one angel was able to slay 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in a given night. So God was very much in charge of that situation, and so these psalms were developed really to look at many of those aspects of how hard it is to start in a difficult place. But then as we finish up with this particular psalm, it really does suggest that, as I have there, we have arrived. And so it's a great little psalm, and we'll look at it here and read it. So it says, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the house of the Lord. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord. The Lord who made heaven and earth, bless you from Zion." So, and this is a chorus that I remember singing even as a teenager in my early Christian days in our Sunday school and that kind of thing. Can't remember the exact tune, but I just remember, and some of you may know the tune that goes with it, but it is a great chorus for worship, and so that's where this comes from, is this particular psalm. So I thought how I'd approach things today is looking at the 5 W's, which is who, what, where, when, and why. So for those of you that know about W5 up in Belfast, up in the Titanic Quarter up there, the reason they call it W5 is because that's what that science place is about, is asking those 5 questions of who and what and where and when and why. So we're going to be asking those questions of this particular passage, and then we'll do our little review. So we have the 5 W's, and actually we're not going to leave it just to the 5 W's, because there is the H that goes along with it, which is how. But we're going to look at how in the summary of the Psalms. So the first thing we need to look at is the who of this particular passage. And there are 3, I would say, 3 sets of people or individuals that are talked about in this particular psalm. And the first one is the Lord, and it is mentioned, that name is mentioned 5 times. So in verse 1 it says, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the house of the Lord. Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord, and the Lord who made heaven and earth." So a very, very central who in this particular psalm is the Lord himself, because that's why these people have come. well, we'll get to the why here shortly, but the attraction is that God is there. This is at the central who. I remember listening to Bill McDonald, who wrote the Believer's Bible Commentary, speak one time at a Brethren full-time workers retreat in the state of Pennsylvania. And one of the things I remember he said in some of his preaching when he was talking about heaven is he says the central attraction of heaven is that the Lord is there. And then he said the central wonder of heaven is that I'll be there. And so I like that because it's, God wants to meet with people. He's the main attraction, but the main wonder is the fact that we can even approach God. And certainly the Lord has secured that entrance fee, as it were, by sending the Lord Jesus Christ to die for our sins. So the sheer fact that God's name is mentioned here 5 times, and it is the personal name for God, the Tetragrammaton, which is the 5 or the 4-letter name, which is what that means. But this is the main attraction of the people that are finally arriving in Jerusalem for the purpose of worship. And then it talks about the servants, because it says, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord." Now, it depends on who you read in terms of commentaries and things like this as to who the servants are. Some would say that this is specifically talking about the priests and the priests only, and those that are serving within the sanctuary precinct. But I believe, as other commentaries would say, is that it's about everybody who's coming to worship God. They're all servants of the Lord. And as we've seen that particular Hebrew word "ibed," it's talking about that person who has an understanding of what his responsibility is, and he is looking in his own life as to how to please his master, and the master is the Lord himself. So the blessing or the blessing of the Lord has been given as an instruction to the servants of the Lord. So this is the collective group. So you have God as the main focal individual to start off with, and then you have servants who are the people that are there to worship God and serve God. But then there is the individual. And if you look at where the pronoun "you" is, because in verse 1 there it says, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord." And then in verse 3 it says, "The Lord who made heaven and earth bless you from Zion." Now the problem is in English, and this is where actually the King James Bible, the Authorized Version, is actually useful in that sense, in deciding what is plural and what is singular. Because when we talk about the word "you" in our English in this day and age, pardon me, I have a bit of a cold. The word "you" can be either singular or plural, because I could talk about you as an individual, or I could talk about you like you all, or as they say up in Belfast, usins, and or y'all, or that's what we would say in Southern America. And in the western part of Pennsylvania, they talk about yins, so as a plural sort of you. But anyway, but technically that word in our modern English works both for plural and for singular. But where it says in verse 1, all you servants of the Lord, uh, that is plural. And now that might be obvious because it's talking about servants, which is plural. But then when you come down to verse 3, it says, the Lord who made heaven and earth bless you from Zion. Now in the King James, it says, bless thee from Zion. Now, thee in the Old King James actually refers to a singular you. And that's how the King James Bible would have basically divided up, what was a singular you and what was a plural you. So a plural you was you, but a singular you was thee. So so it's talking about then the individual at the end of this passage, bless you, singular, from Zion. So God, it's what the who here sort of demonstrates is the central attraction being God, but there is a corporate exercise, which is the servants, the collective you, the plural you, but then there is the how the individual at the end of this psalm is blessed, because he's being blessed by God Himself, because it says the Lord who made heaven and earth bless you, singular, from Zion. So that's the who. This is kind of part of the business of talking about the characters, as we've done in the past. Now the next W is what, and so the first thing here is blessing the Lord, which is mentioned twice. And so because it says, behold, bless the Lord there in verse 1. In verse 2, lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord. So that obviously is a very important thing to do. So it's and blessing the Lord comes from that Hebrew word barak, which has to do with pronouncing a good word, as it were. I have that? No. Pronouncing a good word upon God, and but then later on there's a blessing that we received, and that's the Lord pronouncing a blessing upon us. But the main what here, because this is repeated, because part of Bible study is looking at repetition of stuff, and this phrase is repeated twice in this very short psalm. That blessing the Lord is a very essential thing to do, and saying a good thing about God, that blesses His own soul. But then the second one here is standing, because it says, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who by night stand in the house of the Lord." So so here we have this idea of standing, and it's not sitting, it's not lying down, but what standing depicts is having respect for God, having reverence for God, and fearing the Lord was something that was, very much mentioned, in an earlier psalm. I think it was Psalm, what was it, 128. Yeah, Psalm 128 talked about fearing the Lord. So that was the whole idea of respect and reverence. And then there's this other activity in verse 2, which is lift up your hands in the sanctuary. And I find that lifting up hands sort of speaks to me about being vulnerable. Because when you lift up your hands in the air like this, then what you're doing is you're giving yourself to God and pointing to God, but it does make you then as a person vulnerable to attack from other quarters, from somebody below, and that kind of thing. It's nearly like waving the white flag or surrender or something like this. But here, what the the servants of the Lord are doing as they are lifting up their hands is, yes, they are being vulnerable, but they also know fully of God's protection. So they can do that without any fear of damage or reprisal or the enemy getting in. Because if we think back to Hezekiah, and if this was the end of that whole episode of how God dealt with the Assyrians, them lifting up their hands is not a problem. So they don't have to have weapons in their hands. They don't have to do anything like that, but they can just hold up their hands in blessing the Lord and in worshiping God. So, and it's also the another what is acknowledging the person of God, because it says there in verse 3, the Lord who made heaven and earth. So this is basically saying that God is the creator. He is the one that is all powerful. He's the one that has authority. He is the one that is sovereign. He is the one that not only makes that which we see, but also makes that which we do not see. And because there's an awful lot of stuff that we cannot perceive or see, because we operate within a three-dimensional space, and God is not governed by dimension, but I believe that there is multiple dimensions within the realm of God. So when we get to heaven, we will be able to see things and have perceptions of an understanding of things that is far beyond what our normal sort of 3D is. So, but part of this what here is we need to acknowledge that God is sovereign, God is creator, God indeed is king and has authority. And that says there is worthy of worship, because all these things about standing, about lifting up hands and blessing the Lord, this is all part and parcel of worship. So I think that pretty much covers the who and the what so far. So the next W is the where. So the first thing of where that is mentioned is the house of the Lord. So it says, "Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who stand by night in the house of the Lord." So this is a reference then to the temple. And now, when David was writing some of these psalms, obviously there was no temple at that particular stage. There was a tabernacle meeting, which is where the Lord was, in kind of physical terms. But that particular word for house is the Hebrew word bayit, which it just refers to a dwelling place, where people would be, or where something or someone would dwell. So, but it then moves on and talks about the sanctuary. And if you remember some bunch of meetings ago, we talked about how if you took the value of the word house and added it to the value of the word heart, that equaled a sanctuary. And so it's interesting here that there's a progression here, I believe, in talking about the house here, because as the people of God are serving in the house of God, and as they're lifting up their hands, in the sanctuary, there's a progression from just treating it as a normal dwelling place to a place where people meet with God in a safe place, but it is where God is. So it's not just any old house, So and they're putting their full heart into it. So if you remember, it was like 412, the value of the word house added to the 32, which was the value of the word heart, and you got 444, which was the value of the word sanctuary. So those are the same words that are used there in the original. But it also talks about Zion, because it says in verse 3, the Lord who made heaven and earth bless you from Zion. And so Zion was that area within Jerusalem that was very close to the main temple compound or precinct. So, but basically, what this psalm is really on about is, the people have come. They have finally arrived, and they are in the right place. So the next W here is when, and so it talks about at night. So, uh, so it says again in verse 1, Behold, bless the Lord, all you servants of the Lord who by night stand in the house of the Lord. So the when that this is occurring is at night. So now most people sort of go to bed at this particular stage, maybe rise up in the morning, but when the day actually begins in Jewish sort of reckoning was at evening. When the sun went down, that's when the day started. So this is when this is getting going. Is right at the beginning, as it were, of the Jewish day, and so it speaks to me of priority, speaks to me of importance, but it also speaks to me about uh, what could be perceived as uh, uh, a dark time, a difficult time. But when God's there, God is the light, and because there would have been much light in terms of the menorah that would have been lit in the temple, which was that seven candled candelabra that was there, that was made of solid gold. And then there would have been, other sources of light as well. But the fact that God was there in all His glory, night then didn't matter. There was no terror. There was no, looking at it from a disconcerting point of view, where I'm frightened of getting through the night or whatever. There was, everybody was collectively together, and it didn't matter really whether it was night at all, because God was there and He was the light. So, but it does take place here at night. Uh, then the fifth W is the Y, and it is to worship and serve. Because if we're talking about blessing the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, standing by night in the house of the Lord, lifting up your hands. This is really very much about worship of God and serving God. Now, worshiping God is not just delegated to singing songs. Sometimes when we talk about worship services, we say, well, that really incorporates singing of hymns and that kind of thing. Well, it does include that, but Paul talks about in chapter 12 of Romans about our reasonable worship or our reasonable service. So it could be translated either way. And so the worship of God is not just designated to a particular time, like on a Sunday morning or something like this, or a Sunday evening, but it is how you conduct your life. Is your life and what you do and how you serve, is that worship to God? So that is the why here, is to worship and to serve. Now, I did sort of mention this a little earlier, but some of the why here is by blessing the Lord. That's what they're there for. In fact, that occurs twice, as we said, bless the Lord in verse 1, and then verse 2 there it says, bless the Lord. And this is pronouncing a good word unto the Lord. It's actually, the picture here is of generally, when a blessing takes place, It is a son that is kneeling before the father, and the father then takes his hands and he places it on the son's head and pronounces a good word, a favorable word unto his son. And yet this is sort of thrown into revert, or kind of backwards in a sense, because it's not initially, it's not about God blessing us. We're blessing the Lord. We're actually in a position where we can put our hands on God's head and pronounce a good word unto the Lord. Why? Because He's done great things for us. So, but the Lord loves to receive that from us, and plus, when Jesus says it's more blessed to give than to receive, the idea of us blessing God blesses us because we're actually giving unto the Lord a good word. But then there is the receiving a blessing from the Lord, which is there at the end of verse 3. The Lord who made heaven and earth, bless you from Zion. So here we have by receiving a blessing from the Lord. So that's God pronouncing a good word towards the individual, because that's where your singular you is. So it's interesting that this psalm really is talking about blessing that goes backward and forward, and really when you think about it, how encouraging it is and how good it is when, say, a fellow believer blesses you with a word of encouragement or a good word. Um, so, eh, but and that does help us a lot. It puts us in a good frame of mind. Now I've been in other situations where it wasn't a blessing. It received discouragement from the people of God, unfortunately, and saying certain things, and it gets you into bad twist. And you want to spit the dummy out. You want to run. You want to go away and just say, "Well, the pot with them." And that's what the devil wants to do. The devil wants to stir up dissension. And when we looked at Psalm 133 last week, which was about unity, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Uh, that's about people blessing each other. And so now we're in a situation where God is, we bless the Lord for what He's done for us. We speak a good word unto Him. But that God finishes this whole exercise by pronouncing, as it would were a good word towards us as individuals. So, and basically how this all finishes off is you don't want to leave. When you are in this kind of environment, uh, if this is how this psalm or the set of psalms is finished, it doesn't end with everybody sort of packing up and leaving. That was great, so we'll go home now. Obviously there would be an aspect of that, practically happening, but really, in heavenly terms, when we get to heaven to bless the Lord and receive a blessing from God, that's not going to end. That's and we'll not want to leave. So I've been in services and gatherings of God's people where you just really don't want it to finish. Some people get it in their heads that right, we're there for an hour and we're going to worship God for an hour, hear God's word, and then once it starts moving on beyond an hour and 5 minutes, we start looking at our watch and going, well, we need to get home here. I'm starting to get a bit weary. But when you're in the presence of God, God gives you strength to receive from Him. So that you don't want to go. Why would you want to go? And so I like how this psalm ends. The Lord who made heaven and earth. Who and that, to me, that's a reference to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So So here, here we have the Creator God, the one who's in charge, the one who is king over all things. He's the one that wants to bless you, and he's going to speak a good word toward you. In fact, it's not just a word; it's like loads and loads of words that's going to last forever. And certainly, when you think of it from that perspective, gosh, I wouldn't want to go. So. Uh, so it sort of leaves you kind of on a good note, So it doesn't finish. It just leaves you on a good note of we're here, we're in God's presence, and this is good. Uh, Now, so I wanted to then look at how. So we looked at the five W's there, but the how is looking at these waves of the Songs of Ascent, and so this is where we're going to do this synopsis of these songs using this whole concept of waves. So if you can picture, because there were five different waves. There's 15 psalms, five waves. So it means there's three psalms in each wave. And so we got our little sun, we've got our beach here, and then we got our water. And so the first wave that starts to billow up out in the sea there was Psalm 120. And if you remember that particular psalm, that psalm was tough going, because it started off, in my distress I cried to the Lord, and he heard me. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. So there was a lot of initial despair coming from the psalmist in regard to where he was. We talked later on about woe is me that I dwell in Meshach, which was an area up at the Black Sea, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar, which was in southern Arabia. So two very polarized regions. Obviously, the psalmist couldn't be in both places at once, but it was this idea of being very, very far away, and so that's where this all starts, kind of way out to sea, and the tide really isn't in. Elaine and I were down at Newcastle there on Saturday, and the tide was out, and you could walk way, way, way out, and the waves were like way, way, way out there, but once things start to move in, that's kind of how I picture things. And so we have this second wave there, which is Psalm 121, which was about help and faith in God. So I look into the hills, from whence comes my help. My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. And will not allow your foot to be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is your keeper. And I remember we looked at, well, how does God help? How does God start to, bring the wave in, and how faith is a critical aspect of that. Oops, sorry, didn't go that direction. And then we have the third wave that's coming onto the beach here. Or not the third wave, but this one wave of these first three psalms. So Psalm 122, that was talking really about the victory and God's presence. So you can see that way out to sea is starting with despair, moves on to help and faith, and then there's this victory of God's presence. And a lot of the waves that are hitting the beach here sort of take to do with this kind of victory, God's presence, kind of idea. So that's all well and fine, but then we move on to Psalm 123. The water is up a little bit because the tide is coming in, and so we have the first aspect of the wave, which was Psalm 123, and that was then focusing back to a bad thing again, which was the contempt, especially of the enemies of God, because it talked there about God needing to have mercy on us. And it says in verse 4 that Psalm, our soul is exceedingly filled with scorn of those who are eased, and with the contempt of the proud. So there's a fair bit of a focus on those things. But that particular wave didn't start, aspect of the wave didn't start quite as far out as the Psalm 120 wave, which was just full of despair. Now we're farther in into the shore. And then we have Psalm 124, which is now talking about faith in God's defense. Verse 1 there, it says, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, and then rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us alive. But, it's recognizing, verse 6 there, bless the Lord who has not given us as prey to their teeth. So this middle bit of this particular second wave is farther in than, say, Psalm 121. So we're moving farther inland. And then we have Psalm 125, which talks much about the Lord being strength. So the waves are coming farther up on land because the tide is coming in. So we'll look then at the third wave again. So now the waters is farther up because the tide's farther up the beach, and so the start of the third wave is Psalm 126, which talked about sowing in tears. So that the difficulty of just coming back in terms of the captivity that they were in, so they realized that those who had sown in tears, it says verse 5, shall reap in joy. So growth in God always starts in tears. It starts with being really subjected to your own shortcomings and that kind of thing. But yet those things that you sow and those difficulties and burdens that you take on, God will then turn those around in the reaping of joy. He who continually goes forth weeping, bearing seed for the sowing, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. And then the middle aspect of that third wave is Psalm 127, which talks about God's faithfulness. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. And so it's so if you're seeking to do things on your own and not have God's help with it, then you need to watch out. But the psalmist is focusing on God's faithfulness. And then this third wave that is then coming onto the beach here is the blessing of fearing the Lord, Psalm 128. So as you can see, through these three waves, there is an aspect of things being kind of out there in the first part of the wave, and then as things come in, there's a great sense of release. So now the fourth wave here, the water's kind of way up the beach now, and it's a good thing it's still sunny outside. So Psalm 129 starts this fourth wave, and there is a focus on affliction, but affliction is not the end of what's taken place, because it says at the beginning of that psalm, many a time they have afflicted me from my youth. Let Israel now say, and many a time they've afflicted me from my youth, yet they have not prevailed against me. So this idea of being stuck in affliction is not the end, because God is going to do something. God is going to bring people to His presence. then Psalm 130, which I think we had a great time in, is God's full deliverance. If you remember, uh, out of the depths that cried to you, O Lord, Lord, you heard my voice, let your ears be attentive to the voice of my supplications. I talked about uh, God's deliverance from death to life. Oops. Uh, and and then the second two verses of that psalm, talked about, Lord, if you should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But there is forgiveness with you that you may be feared. So here we're, talking about, God's forgiveness of sin, because otherwise we would be stuck in guilt. And then the third aspect in that particular psalm was going from darkness to light. And the last couple of verses there, verse 7 and 8, talked about going from bondage to redemption. And so this is God's, full deliverance from the hand of the enemy. So, and then how this fourth wave stops is resting on the heart of God. And we had, again, a wonderful time thinking about like a weaned child with his mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me, and just, resting on the heart of God and hearing the heart of God. And we talked about how the arm of God would be around us to protect us, and that the head of God was above us to demonstrate his authority. And that, and then because we were close to the heart of God, we understood his love for us. So you can see how that is a great piece of the wave that's coming onto the shore here. And then as things finish up here, we're into the fifth wave, and so the water's way up, and this is as far as the tide comes in. And so we have this last wave that then starts with Psalm 132, which basically has this idea: we will push on to meet the Lord. Because sometimes like the mountain of Zion, the mountains of Jerusalem, was up on a pretty substantial hill, a mountain, and so you had to, the way there might have been, somewhat with a light grade, as it were, but you go up, you make that last push. I took Letitia's now fiance, Adam, and Alicia's boyfriend Sam up to Slieve Doan, out in the middle of the Bournes there the other week, and I remember when we were making our way to Doan, it was a bit of a grade up, but it was okay. But then the final assault, you really had to push on, and that's what we did. We just put our heads down and just made it up to the top of the thing. And there was rocks that we had to clamber over and that kind of stuff. But that's reminds me a little bit of what Psalm 32 is like. Is pushing on to meet God. And then the middle of this wave was what we talked about last week, which was the unity of believers. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And we talked about the precious oil upon the head, and looked at all those different aspects of the death then to self, because that's what the myrrh spoke of. And it spoke of expense and how far-reaching things of unity go, and so on. And then looked at the dew of Hermon, and how refreshing the unity of believers is. So, and this really is, kind of pushing up to the top. This is, we're just about there, but we're collectively looking at each other and helping each other and encouraging each other. We're not trying to pull each other down, trying to be the first one or something like this, but we're going up to the top, and then we'll get this extraordinary view, which is where we are from today, which is the worship of the Lord, which is Psalm 31, 34. So that finishes then the fifth wave, and that's as far as the tide comes in, as it were. So I trust that that's a helpful way to look at these 15 Psalms very, very quickly and briefly. But I've really enjoyed going through these Psalms, because it'd be safe to say that some of these Psalms I really haven't sort of read and reflected on as much as I have had in the last number of weeks of doing this. So that's where things finish up, and that's where we'll leave it